Hello, F2 Fan 5000 here. Come to analyse the midway point of the FIA Formula 3 Championship of 2025. Although we've had a lot of exciting racing, it's clear that Rafael Camara is going to be winning the Drivers' Championship unless something dramatic happens in the second half of the season. He's taken 4 pole positions and 3 feature race wins. It's highly unlikely that anyone can beat him. However, it's very tight behind him with Tramnitz, Tsolov, Stromsted. These sort of drivers are looking to battle for that second position. Yeah, so looking at this, I just think Stromsted can get back ahead of Tramnitz, providing he has clean weekends, doesn't suffer the mechanical problems. Taponen is a question for me. But I think he's shown a lot of grit and determination to get the most out of the ART car, something that both his teammates have struggled with. Giusti is a driver I'm looking out for. I won't be surprised to see him surge forward in the second half of the season. And as I said, Belinsky, I'm hoping to see that he can convert some of that underlying pace he has. Ramos is there in the top 8, but I'm not sure about him. He's 6th in the championship. But I don't know. But VAR looks strong at the moment. They're strong at Barcelona. Why can't they be strong at circuits like Silverstone and Austria? That's one thing. And the other thing is that if they are, that will help Teofil Nal and Santiago Ramos go forward. But as we've seen in this championship, except for Camara dominating at the front, we've seen the drivers behind constantly change the pecking order, I mean, the results for Santiago Ramos are just unbelievable. A feature race win followed by, the week after qualifying at the back of Monte Carlo and not scoring any points and being nowhere in Bahrain and a sprint race win. It's so up and down, it's unbelievable. It's I don't know, but it's crazy. So you can't really predict Formula 3. But as I said, Giusti, Van Hoopen's another one. You saw there, the last few rounds he started to score points. Hopefully he can start converting a good qualifying form into a lot of regular points, get back into the top 10 of the championship. Maybe we'll see him in F2 next year. Prema, I don't know. Really, I'm hoping to see something from Noel Leon. I think he's a good driver. I said he was the 3rd best driver last season in Formula 3. I was surprised he didn't make the jump to Formula 2. When I said 3rd best, obviously he didn't finish 3rd in last year's championship, but overall, considering he's driving for Van Amersfoort and he got all those podiums and improved throughout the season, I thought he was the 3rd best performing driver in F3, and now we come to this season, he can't score points. Okachukwu and Bardoa, I don't know what's happening with Prema. The only driver in the junior categories that's doing well is Sebastian Montoya. Maybe they can get some of his setup data imported into F3. I don't know. Other than that, Ramos, Callum Voigt, Belinsky, I'm hoping to see more from. Okachukwu has been very good in Formula Regional Middle East, but struggled in Formula Regional European. I'm sure there's more to Okachukwu, Formula 4 runner-up back in 2023. He may have even won the E4 championship, which is only 3 rounds, but still. I think he's a very good driver. I just don't know why there's no results there. Obviously, can Camara keep up the domination? That's another thing to look out for. Are other drivers going to make that step? I think as I said, the ones to watch out for are Taponen, Belinsky, Stromsted, Giusti. I think Tramnitz is an interesting one to watch. Can he finally make the step? This guy's going to be 21 at the end of this year. Is he getting a bit old? One of the older drivers. We want to see him make the step to a consistent feature race podium consistently on the feature race podium. But if he finishes top for 3 or 4 in a championship, he might get that Campos F2 drive, which I don't think is a bad gig. Maybe that's what he's aiming for. Maybe whether he finishes 2nd or 3rd or 4th in F3 doesn't matter. But I think it does, at least mentally. I think there is a very good driver in there. We saw him in Formula Regional European when he finished 3rd behind Stenson and Kimi Antonelli. Obviously was winning races there. Stenson is one. I mean, he's in the high-tech team. The other drivers are struggling. I don't think that Carrasquedo and Z are a high bar to clear, so I don't know what to say about Stenson. You're sort of hoping to see some spark that reminds you of 2023, and you see a little bit of it occasionally, but not enough, not consistently enough. No. Christian Ho, can he score more points against his, just to show like he's doing a good job, but it's nice to have points on the board, consistently finishing ahead of Matthias Zagazita. Very good job there. AIX, I don't know what's going to happen with AIX. They change drivers regularly there. But I'm sure that Nikola Marinangeli will be consistently qualifying on the back row for the last 5 races. Who else is there? Rodin. I think Rodin, there's more to come from Rodin overall. Louis Sharp, want to see how he does. I think he's on an upward trajectory. You want to see him score more points. He did really well in Monte Carlo. Belinsky, I'm sure we'll see more of. Van Amersfoort is again, are they going to be up or down? I don't know. Maybe every second race they'll win, and every other weekend they won't score points. I don't know. Fabulous weekend for Van Amersfoort and Spain, obviously. But dreadful in Monte Carlo, so I don't know. But obviously, with the tight nature of the championship, it's all about maximising every opportunity, finding every 100th of a second, and the swings and the roundabouts. You could be, 5th in the championship, 2 rounds later, you're 15th in the championship if you don't keep it going. Like Teofil Nall was 2nd in the championship after Australian, and after Monte Carlo, he was, I don't know where he was. He was outside the top 10. And then he's back well in the top 10. So I don't know. It just changes rapidly and quickly. But I think Carver has got held on. And I think the likes of Tramnitz, Stromsted, I think even Giusti, Taponen are fighting for 3rd in the championship. I think Tsolov is going to take 2nd in the championship. If Tsolov takes 2nd in the championship, he'll probably get the Campos drive. Where does that leave Tim Tramnitz? I don't know. If he finishes 3rd or 4th, is he going to go with MP? Yeah, he might take Oliver Goethe's place in MP. If I was Tramnitz, I'd rather be in Campos. But anyway, Taponen, they're all fighting for that 3rd spot in the championship. A lot of super licence points there. Some of these drivers already probably have enough points for a super licence. So It'll be very exciting to see how it all works out. Yeah, but just a little bit more. Some of the drivers and teams that have really disappointed so far, Callum Voisin a little bit. ART have disappointed a fair bit, especially James Wharton. Prema, absolutely across the board, been a disaster. I thought Dams would do better. I thought, Zagazeta in his second year, the team has just looked like Genza. They don't look like Dams. And, a lot of disappointments and a couple of pleasant surprises. But to me, Buttower and Wharton are the two biggest disappointments so far this season. Now, obviously over here with F2 Fan 5000, we always look at the bigger picture. We don't just scratch the surface of everything. Obviously, Karma is clearly the dominator, but we look at the main feature of the first half and we talk about the themes going into the second half. So we're going to look at the data now. So firstly, these are the driver standings. As you can see, Camara has the 3 feature race wins, 1 in Melbourne, 1 in Bahrain, 1 in Barcelona, all with pole positions and fastest lap. He also had a pole converted to 3rd place in the feature race for Imola. Second is Nikola Tsolov. He did the win pole fastest lap in Monte Carlo. He also has a sprint race win and 2 further podiums, both in the sprint. Tim Tramnitz had a sprint race win and has been very consistent. Stromsted 4th. I think Stromsted's been a bit unlucky. He had especially in the Spain sprint race, he probably would have taken at least 9 points from that race, but his car failed. 9 points, he's on 56. He'd still be 4th in the championship, but he'd be a lot closer to Tramnitz. Tuukka Taponen has had an up and down season, but is somehow 5th in the championship. Santiago Ramos is 6th with 1 feature race win, 1 sprint win, and a lot of non-scores. Giusti has been very consistent. So up and Taufeonala's had 2 really good weekends and a lot of poor weekends, 3 poor weekends in the middle. He's on 43 points. They're the main characters to look at. But when you look at the data tells a slightly different story. So this is the main data to look at. The first column is the qualifying, and I've adjusted it, okay? Obviously, Rafael Camara didn't get pole in Monaco, so he doesn't have a perfect qualifying record, but I've adjusted it so it's easy for everyone to understand that all these numbers are in comparison. This is seconds, by the way. Everyone can understand that this is in comparison to Rafael Camara. So he's the fastest qualifier, and the nearest qualifier is more than 3/10 back from him, which is Nikola Tsolov, who's 0.327 seconds behind Camara, followed closely by Stromsted, who's 0.344. So this indicates that in qualifying pace, Rafael Camara has absolutely obliterated the field. 3/10 a lap is a massive difference. However, the race pace tells us a different story. Now, before I go on, there's a couple of drivers here who I'm going to eliminate. I just wanted to show this graphic as an overall picture. Now you see Freddie Slater in second place has only done 1 race weekend. I know Freddie Slater is fast. Freddie is one of the best drivers coming up through the ranks. However, his race pace 0.087 is a little bit misleading, because his only race that counts towards this is a sprint race where he started on pole, a reverse grid sprint race. Did he start on pole or up the front anyway? Sorry, I can't remember the exact detail. He's only done one weekend. Nikita Bedrin is fairly high up the order. He's also done one weekend. And then Garfias, for example, Karashkado, these drivers, they don't, as far as I'm concerned, they shouldn't figure in the conversation. So let's get the, this is the one I want, right? So this removes all the drivers that aren't really there. And as we can see, Camara 3/10 up on the next fastest driver, Tsolov, in qualifying, which is a massive difference. And Stromsted is third. And then there's still a decent gap from Stromsted in third to Tramnitz in fourth. Stromsted is almost 2/10 a lap in qualifying faster than Tramnitz, as we can see. That's a decent gap. And then behind Tramnitz, it's fairly congested in terms of qualifying pace, with Giusti, Taponen, Boysen, Leon, for example, Delpino. So yeah, it's very close. In race pace, I haven't adjusted to Camara, and that's because, well, maybe I should have, but in any case, he's not the fastest driver in race pace, which is a big surprise, but I'll get into that why. But the driver that has the fastest race pace is Nikola Tsolov. So because he didn't win every race, obviously, on average, he's 0.4 of a second a lap slower than a hypothetical fastest race pace. And about 1/10 of a second back is Rafael Camara, and another 1/10 behind him is Tim Tramnitz. And I don't think it's any surprise then that these two drivers are the top three in the championship, because points are handed out. The overwhelming majority of points are handed out in the races. But how do we explain Nikola Tsolov having better race pace than Camara? Well, it comes back to the fact that the race pace is 1/3 made up of sprint races, right? So if we look here, we look at the sprint races. Camara, when he has finished, he's finished 12th in Bahrain, 11th in Imola, and 7th in Monte Carlo. That's the sort of performance. So he's falling behind in the sprint race, detracting from his overall race pace scores, whereas Tsolov has been on the podium in 3 of the sprint races. I don't know why he's 24th in Monte Carlo. Maybe he had an accident. And then, of course, 8th in Albert Park. With that in mind, we can understand exactly why Tsolov, and what that also means is in the feature races, even though that Camara is ahead of Tsolov, the gap in terms of time between Camara and Tsolov in the feature races is not as big as the gap between Tsolov and Camara in the sprint races. And that's where Tsolov is able to somehow stay in contention, though he's a very distant second in the championship. But in terms of his race pace, every race he's maximising the potential. And the third column here is the ultimate pace. The ultimate pace is an average of the qualifying pace and the race pace, and then this is adjusted to the fastest driver, which is obviously Rafael Camara. So the ultimate pace is a hypothetical, theoretical time that this driver does based on their qualifying and race pace data. And Camara is the fastest, and Nikola Tsolov, again, is second. He is 1/10 behind, and they have quite a gap over the rest of the field, I would say. Not only that, but there's a big gap. As I said, in the qualifying pace, you have Camara, and then you had close behind, then a long way behind him, but in second and third, you had to have Tsolov and Stromsted. And then here I can say that Camara and Tsolov in terms of ultimate pace are up the top. And then you've got in second place, not a long way behind, is Tramnitz and Stromsted. Roman Belinsky's fifth in ultimate pace. That's fantastic from Roman Belinsky. He's very much flying under the radar at the moment, the best Roden driver, beating Callum Voisin. His race pace, I'll get to the teammate comparison soon, but Belinsky's fifth, that's fantastic. And Giusti, see, there's a gap of more than 1/10 from Stromsted to Belinsky, and another gap back to Giusti. So the gap between Stromsted in third and Giusti in fifth is almost 2/10. So there's a deep that group at the front. Camara and Tsolov are right ahead. Then there's another little group behind them: Tramnitz, Stromsted, Belinsky, and then there's another gap basically to the main body of the upper midfield, headed by Giusti, Taponen, Voisin, Boyer, Stenson. This is all to do with time. This is all the pace that they've had. This does not look at championship points. So these tenths of a second are very crucial. And we're going to look now at the teammate comparisons. We're going to start with Prema. Okay? And it's clear, as it has been when you watch the races, maybe not when you look at the championship order, but when you watch the races, it's clear that Noel Leon has an edge over his two younger, less experienced teammates. As we will see, that's not always the case, but with Prema it is. And this team in ultimate pace is averaging more than a second off the pace of Camara, and that's shocking. That means to me that Prema are struggling with the setup of this car as they did in Formula 2 in 2024. The ground effects have stumped them. Their race pace is horrible. Their qualifying pace more than half a second off on average. Noel Leon is handling it better than his younger teammates. And Brando Badoer, don't forget, a consistent podium scorer and finished top 5 in last year's Formula Regional European Championship. He's almost a second every qualifying session off Camara, which is a massive difference, and his race pace is hopeless. He's almost more than half a second slower than his own teammate Noel Leon, and also in ultimate pace he's almost half a second slower than Noel Leon. Ukachukwu is faring better, but this team is really struggling, and they are last in the team's championship, which is hopeless when you consider that Prema have won the Formula 3 championship for many years running. Coming to Trident, they're the best team. We can see clearly that across the board, Rafael Camara has a 0.3 of a second advantage over Noah Stromsted. Maybe close to 3.5 of a second. And Stromsted has about another 3.5 of a second on Charlie Wirtz. But I'm thinking, right, this is F2 Fan 5000 here. We don't just scratch the surface. We dig beneath it. To me, Noah Stromsted is younger and less experienced than Rafael Camara. And in a couple of years, I think Stromsted would be closer to Camara, because he's like 2.5 years the age difference. And at that age, in these heavy, bulky Formula 3 cars, I think that's a big advantage, the age thing. And for Camara over Stromsted, one being 20 years old at the start of the year, the other one being 17 and a half. And being small, being diminutive. But Charlie Wirtz is the most experienced driver here, and it's clear to see, even though he has had some decent results, he's not bringing the pace at all. So it's clear to see the three different teammates on different trajectories here. Yeah, and Wirtz is disappointing. Now, if we look at ART, Laurens Van Hoopen, Tuukka Taponen, James Wharton. Taponen and Van Hoopen are very evenly matched drivers here. Taponen is younger and less experienced, but nonetheless, it shows that Van Hoopen maybe hasn't got the results his pace deserved, whereas James Wharton is very slow compared to both of them. In qualifying, now another thing I want to tell you, don't be surprised, especially with the teams that are more in the midfield, that the qualifying gap and the race gap are different, right? So we can see here Wharton is about 3 or 4 tenths off Taponen and Van Hoopen in qualifying, but in the race Wharton is close to 7 tenths slower than his teammates. Now why that gap is larger in the race pace deficit is because obviously if you're qualifying further back, you've got to deal with slower cars, dirty air, battling in the midfield, DRS trains, and that exacerbates your pace deficit in the race. So it doesn't actually mean that in free air that James Wharton would be up to 7 tenths of a second a lap slower than Laurens Van Hoopen. Doesn't mean that, but because Van Hoopen is starting around 13th place, for example, the cars in front of him are faster, whereas James Wharton, if he's starting in 23rd place, some of the cars in front of him are slower, he's stuck behind them, DRS trains, etc. So yeah, James Wharton is like that. That's why there's a gap, and you'll see this across the board when you look at these figures. But the thing is, James Wharton finished second last year in FIA Formula Regional, and you have to wonder why he's so slow here in Formula 3. A second down on Rafael Camara. He's even slower than Brando Baudouin. That's amazing. The ART obviously is not the fastest car. Here it's got about an 8 tenths of a second deficit to the, but still that is very poor by James Wharton compared to Taponen and Van Hoopen. I would never have guessed that James Wharton would do such a bad job, but he has. And coming to Campos, it's obvious who the star driver is here, but as I explained just then, there's reasons why the race pace deficit is so large to Zanopol Intrafuvazak. But overall, Nikola Tsolov is half a second faster than Intrafuvazak, well, they're about the same in terms of experience and age, but Tsolov is really bringing his A game this year, but he's still 3 tenths or 0.327 off Karma in qualifying, 1 tenth off overall because he's faster in the races. Boya's about 3 tenths of a second back in qualifying, and that's almost 7 tenths of a second back in the race. That's because Boya starts back further, or maybe Nikola Tsolov just maximises his opportunities. Either way, Boya, as we've seen, gets caught up in battles in the midfield. So does Zanopol Intrafuvazak. Look at Boya and Intrafuvazak. There's about a 2 tenths of a second gap between them in qualifying, but that's a lot of positions in F3's midfield. and Intrafuvazak is qualifying poorly and having to come through the field with that Campos, which is a pretty good car this year. And sometimes with circuits like Imola, Monte Carlo, it's not easy to make those overtakes. Yeah, but definitely Tsolov is the star of Campos. Then we come to High Tech with Stenson, Dufek, Carrasquedo Jr. and Gerard G. Now, the thing that surprised me when I look at this is that Stenson and Dufek have almost the same qualifying pace. But when it comes... Now, we've seen Joshua Dufek has lost his seat mid-season to Jesse Carrasquedo Jr. Now, that's highly unusual for High Tech. They usually like to let their drivers finish a season, even if they're running short of money. Maybe that's why Dufek run out of money, or maybe sponsors didn't want to pay for him anymore. Obviously, Dufek didn't score any points, whereas Stenson is battling to stay in the top 10 of the championship and has some points on the board. But in qualifying pace, they're almost even, which is a surprise. Obviously, Gerard G is about 6/10 behind them. Carrasquedo's data is based on one race only, so I'm not going to go into it too much. But yeah, I think Dufek and Stenson, I think that small gap of 30 hundredths of a second can be the difference. We've seen Stenson a couple of times qualify 11th or 12th, which means in the sprint race you're going to start at the front. Whereas Dufek maybe qualified 13th or 14th and missed out on that getting into the top 12 just because he's that slightly bit slower than Stenson in qualifying. However, he did start on pole for one of the sprint races and absolutely destroyed it. So maybe there's also a case of Joshua Dufek not making the most of his races, not driving cleanly, and Gerard G is a long way behind both of them in terms of his pace. We come to MP Motorsport, and Tim Tramnitz, Bruno Delpino and Alessandro Giusti almost identical with their qualifying pace, which is a huge surprise because there's such a large split of where they are. I'll just try and bring the championship up. There we go. We can see Tramnitz is in 3rd, Giusti's in 7th, Delpino's down in 18th. But with qualifying, they're almost identical, so I think it's much the same thing. Now, as we see, before we go on further, you've got to look at the race pace is massively different. We can see that Tim Tramnitz has one of the best race pace data here. I think he's 3rd fastest in race pace, which is not a surprise why he's 3rd in the championship. Alessandro Giusti is 4/10 slower than him in the races, and Bruno Delpino is almost 1 second slower than Tim Tramnitz, which is quite amazing. I think partly to do with Tim Tramnitz is more experienced than Delpino or Giusti, and partly because and when he gets in the race, he's able to make overtakes more cleanly. He knows when to pick his battles, whereas Delpino and especially and Giusti to a lesser extent are probably fighting too hard to make the overtakes. But I also think that small gap, that 0.524 for Tramnitz and the 0.566, 0.614 for the other two drivers, means that Tramnitz is sneaking into the top 12, and that's putting him near the front for the reverse grid sprint race, whereas Delpino and Giusti are missing out on that. But obviously Giusti is in the race pace has been a lot faster than Delpino, and he's in the top, I think he's 7th place in the championship, and overall he's about 2/10 off Tramnitz, which is very good considering considering it's his first season. and Tramnitz is one of the best drivers currently in Formula 3. Delpino needs to work a little bit on his race pace, but I'm very intrigued because you have to consider that Tramnitz is a second-year driver. Bruno Delpino is making the step up from Euro Cup 3, and Alessandro Giusti is making the step up from FRECA, or Formula Regional. Now, Formula Regional is usually more highly regarded as a feeder series than Euro Cup 3, but Bruno Delpino's qualifying pace indicates that the drivers coming up to Formula 3 from Euro Cup 3 are getting faster and more competitive, and we'll see more about that later. I think as time goes on, Euro Cup 3 will become just as highly regarded as a feeder series as Formula Regional European, or it might take over. Now let's get on to this Van Amersfoort Racing. All the drivers have been over the shop this year. They've all stood on the podium, and they all know what it's like to start near the back of the grid as well. So in qualifying, it's clear that Teofil Nall is the team leader. He is just faster. He's 3/10 faster than Dominguez and 4/10 faster than Ramos in qualifying. Now, Ramos has had a pole position, so just shows how much Santiago Ramos has struggled with consistency, as he did last year in 2024. When it comes to race pace, Ramos is very close to Teofil Nall, with Dominguez about 3 or 4 tenths back. And overall, that means that Teofil Nall is about 3 tenths faster than Santiago Ramos, and Dominguez is another tenth or two behind Ramos. So in terms of speed, Teofil Nall is the fastest driver in Van Amersfoort. Obviously, on his day, Santiago Ramos is very fast. He's taken a feature race win. I don't think he got pole. He started second, but he got the win, so that's very good for him. Obviously, Camara got pole for that race. Now, going to the second lot of teams. Callum Voisin, right, Roden. Now, the thing that stood out to me when I looked at this is how far behind Louis Sharp looks to be. But I don't think Louis Sharp is that far behind Roman Belinsky or Callum Voisin. I think, as I said, I think the race pace deficit we see here, Louis Sharp being about half a second off Voisin and Belinsky, is because he's that small gap of about a tenth where Sharp is in the qualifying pace means he misses out on starting in the top 12, which was very true in Monte Carlo. He just missed out, whereas I believe the other two drivers were inside the top 12, and I think they've consistently been qualifying at the back of the top 12, which means you start near the front of the grid in the sprint race. With that in mind, I think Louis Sharp, in terms of his actual pace, is a lot closer to Belinsky and Voisin, and the race pace data is skewed by the fact that 1/10 of a second he has behind his two teammates in qualifying is putting him a lot of places, like 5 to 10 places back in the pack. Also, it could be a lack of experience at this level. Louis Sharp obviously comes from GB3, and this is his first season in F3, so maybe he attacks the drivers too much, burns up his tyres in the races, whereas Belinsky has a lot of experience in Formula Regional, and Callum Voisin is also from GB3, but this is his second season. In the ultimate pace, Roman Belinsky, while having a lot of experience in Formula Regional European Championship, is first season in Formula 3, and he's the fifth fastest driver overall. that speaks to how good his race pace has been. He's about a quarter of a second faster in race pace than Callum Voisin, and more than half a second faster than Sharp. And in the ultimate pace, as you can see, 0.449 versus 0.595 versus 0.872. Belinsky is flying under the radar here. I think he's had some unfortunate incident somewhere, or he may have caused the crash himself, but his underlying pace is very good. So hopefully he can have a strong second half of the season, get himself well inside the top 10, not just like 10th place in the championship, but like up to 5th or 6th, really show that underlying pace. And then AIX has been a mess. I just want to say Callum Voisin is slightly disappointing. I thought he would have been the team leader, and he is leading in the championship. We'll just look at the championship standings for a sec. Yeah, so Voisin is 9th, Belinsky is 10th, separated by 3 points. But, you know, Belinsky suffered a double retirement in Catalonia, and Voisin only came away with, 1 point. You see Louis Sharp back in 19th place, but I think his pace is not as bad as all that makes it out to be. I think in terms of Louis Sharp and his pace is closer to his two teammates. But I think Roman Belinsky's been faster than Callum Voisin, and hopefully he gets to show that. Now we look at AIX, and it's a mess. The one thing you can count on is Nikola Marinangeli. He's been there every race, and he's been very slow. He's, according to this, every lap he's 2 seconds a lap slower than Rafael Camara, who's the fastest driver. And even drivers like Benavides has 8 tenths, so he's more than a second slower than Benavides. Segura struggled. I think Segura's numbers are worse than they should appear, because he was in that wet race in Australia, and the race pace is exacerbated because you're going more slowly in the rain, and the qualifying is not bad about his. And then Garfias hasn't finished a race yet. James Headley, I think, was a bit slow. It ended up pretty disastrously for him, entering his hand. Maybe we'll see him come back to the team in Austria. Let's wait and see. And then lastly, one of the most interesting teams to analyse is Dams. Now, Dams used to be Genza, and Genza was always a sort of a backmarker team in Formula 3. And here, the Dams team has sort of taken off where Genza started. And if I just look at the team's championship quickly, you can see they're in 9th place with 10 points. So a bit underwhelming. Somehow they're ahead of Prema, which tells you how badly Prema are doing at the moment. But I want to point out Christian Ho. In qualifying, he's more than a 10th faster than Zagazeta. Christian Ho is last year's Euro Cup 3 champion, and Zagazeta is a very experienced driver. So for that gap to exist is surprising. And I just want to look at the ultimate pace here. You can see that he's actually almost a quarter of a second faster on average than Zagazeta, so he's making up more positions in the races. I think because both of them are more than a second slower than Camara, that these drivers are starting outside of the top 10, all three of them. And I think Christian Ho's race pace is more to do, the gap is more to do with Christian Ho just being faster than his two teammates. I mean, Nicola Lacorte was a very average driver in Formula 4, in Formula Regional, so it's no surprise he's an average driver here. But for Christian Ho to be a quarter of a second faster than Zagazzetta is very impressive. He's flying under the radar as Christian Ho. We'll look at the... where is he in the championship? 22nd. It's hardly flattering, right? Being 22nd in the championship, but... and he's behind Zagazzetta. But I think in terms of his pace, you just look here, like the sprint race, for example, in Catalonia, he's 11th, Zagazzetta's 18th. In the feature race, 14 versus 15. In the feature race for Monte Carlo, it's 13 versus 15. The sprint race, it's 15 versus 17. So except for the opening weekend in Australia, when it was washed out and Christian Ho had the crash and Zagazzetta was more experienced and was able to score a point in the sprint race, actually. But you see, all these numbers here, Christian Ho has finished ahead of Zagazzetta. So I think Christian Ho is doing a very good job, and it's flying under the radar because dams is dams.